The opera house rose against the night sky like a palace carved from light, its tall columns illuminated in soft gold, and its wide marble steps crowded with elegantly dressed guests ascending beneath the glow of chandeliers visible even from the street. Emilia stood at the base of those steps for a long moment before climbing them, her gloved hands clasped lightly in front of her, her borrowed gown flowing gently around her ankles with each measured breath she took. The invitation resting in her small clutch felt heavier than paper should, not because of the ink or the embossed seal, but because of what it represented. A doorway into a world she had only glimpsed from afar. She had attended performances before from the highest balcony seats with her father when tickets were discounted. But tonight she entered through the main doors, greeted by ushers who checked her name against a list that included diplomats, magnates, and cultural icons. Inside, the lobby shimmered with crystal and conversation, perfume mingling with polished wood and anticipation. When Victor Corelli stepped from the shadows near the grand staircase, dressed in a charcoal suit without the usual entourage flanking him, she noticed immediately that he carried himself differently here. In the restaurant, he had owned the space through fear. Here, in a temple built for art rather than influence, he seemed almost contemplative. He inclined his head slightly in greeting. "You came," he said, his voice quieter than she remembered. "I said I would," she replied. There was no trace of the waitress in her posture tonight. She stood as an equal guest beneath the vaulted ceiling. They walked together toward the private box reserved for him, though she sensed that the walls of the opera house softened the sharp edges of his reputation. When they took their seats overlooking the stage, the orchestra below tuned their instruments, each note blending into a tapestry of promise. Victor leaned forward on the velvet railing, watching the musicians with focused curiosity rather than impatience. "I've attended dozens of performances," he admitted, "but I've never truly listened." Emilia glanced at him, recognizing the honesty threaded through the statement. "Listening requires vulnerability," she said gently. "Music reaches places power cannot." The lights dimmed gradually, quieting the audience into reverent silence. When the curtain rose, the soprano began the same aria Victor had once used as a wager. The voice that filled the hall was magnificent, trained and commanding, yet Emilia felt no envy, only admiration. She allowed the music to move through her, closing her eyes briefly to absorb the swell of strings and brass. Beside her, Victor remained unusually still. She sensed that something within him was shifting, like ice beginning to crack beneath warmth. During intermission, instead of retreating to the lounge where influential guests gathered, he remained seated. "Would you ever stand on that stage?" he asked suddenly, his gaze fixed on the velvet curtain. Emilia considered the question carefully. "Yes," she answered, "but not because someone dares me to." He nodded slowly, absorbing the difference. "And what would it take?" She felt the weight of years of quiet discipline behind her response. "Training, auditions, patience, courage." He exhaled thoughtfully. "Those are currencies I understand." She smiled faintly. "They are earned differently in music." The house lights flickered, signaling the end of intermission. But before the orchestra resumed, a quiet commotion stirred near the stage entrance. The conductor, having heard rumors of the restaurant performance, stepped forward and addressed the audience with poised enthusiasm. He spoke briefly of unexpected talent discovered in unlikely places and announced a special interlude, a young woman present tonight who would offer a short performance. Emilia's heart skipped as Victor turned to her in surprise. "Did you know?" he asked. She shook her head, stunned yet steady. An usher approached discreetly, whispering confirmation that the invitation had included an audition opportunity. The moment had arrived sooner than she anticipated. Victor rose immediately. "Go," he said, not as an order but as encouragement. She descended the curved staircase from the box, aware of hundreds of eyes following her path. Each step felt both fragile and powerful. Backstage, the conductor greeted her warmly, offering swift instructions. There was no time for doubt. When she emerged onto the stage, bathed in brilliant light, the vastness of the hall threatened to swallow her, but only for a heartbeat. She centered herself, recalling her father's steady hands guiding hers across worn piano keys. The orchestra began softly, and she joined them. Her voice carried differently here, richer, amplified by architecture designed to honor sound. The aria unfolded not as a challenge but as a declaration. Every note was deliberate, shaped by discipline rather than defiance. In the private box above, Victor watched without blinking, his expression stripped of arrogance, replaced by awe that bordered on humility. He was witnessing something he could not command, purchase, or intimidate, pure talent refined by perseverance. As Amelia reached the climactic high note, it soared effortlessly through the opera house, resonating against gilded balconies and velvet drapes. The audience leaned forward collectively, drawn into the sincerity of her performance. When the final note faded, silence lingered for a sacred instant before applause erupted like thunder rolling across marble and gold. People rose from their seats, the ovation swelling into a wave that seemed endless. Amelia bowed gracefully, emotion shimmering in her eyes yet anchored by composure. Backstage, congratulations poured in from musicians and patrons alike. The conductor spoke eagerly of formal auditions, of training opportunities, of doors opening. When she finally stepped back into the night air outside the opera house, Victor was waiting near the entrance beneath a canopy of light. He approached slowly, hands in his coat pockets, his voice uncharacteristically soft. "You belong there," he said simply. There was no trace of wager or spectacle in his tone, only conviction. Amelia studied him, recognizing that the transformation unfolding was not just her own. "Belonging isn't given," she replied gently. "It's claimed." He nodded, understanding the deeper message. "Then claim it," he said. For a moment they stood beneath the city lights, the distant echo of applause still lingering in memory. "And the proposal?" he asked after a pause, not teasing but sincere. Amelia met his gaze steadily. "If you ever ask again," she said, "let it be because you admire the woman I am, not the performance I gave." A faint, respectful smile touched his lips. "Then I will wait," he answered. As they parted ways at the corner, there was no dramatic flourish, only a quiet awareness that something significant had shifted. Amelia walked toward her future illuminated not by chandeliers but by self-belief, while behind her, a man once defined solely by power began to understand that true strength is found not in commanding a room, but in learning how to listen within it.